Yeah, I'm going to start recording now because Kevin's going to give out all the gold, and we gotta get this on record.
Yes.
Put it behind the paywall.
Put it behind the paywall.
Welcome everyone to the Profit Meets Purpose podcast presented by Constant Method, where we explore how for-profit companies can thrive while supporting nonprofits and their missions. Whether you're a new startup or an existing company trying to launch a product or service aimed at the nonprofit market, this podcast exists to help you discover what it takes to create impact and profit by supporting those who serve others. So today we're back in our ongoing series that is focusing on specific ways that companies and people can get better at sales to nonprofits. Our topic today comes from conversations that the Constant Method team has had with a lot of companies when we're asking questions like, when your customers buy, why do they buy? And when they don't buy or they say no, or in a nonprofit's case, because they're too nice to say no, they just stop returning your calls. Why are they doing that? And what we discovered is that a lot of tech companies, agencies, consultants, anybody who is selling to nonprofit is not doing a lot of win-loss retrospectives. So to help us today on this topic, I've got my recurring guest, as always, my Constant Method co-founder, Kevin Kramer, and our special guest, my distant cousin, a legend in the nonprofit sales space, has spent over 2 decades in sales, the last 10 of which have been in the nonprofit sales space. Currently, our guest, Scott Cross, is VP of Sales at iDonate, an online donation platform that helps nonprofits turn website visitors into donors without more work. Scott, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm actually going to throw a loop here on the first question for both Scott and Kevin. What do you call these? Postmortems? Retrospectives?
We just call them win-loss, frankly.
That's always win-loss calls for me.
Yeah,
for sure.
Postmortem too dark?
Yes.
Perhaps.
Yes. We're hoping it's not mortem.
Yeah,
that's true. I slept through too many Italian classes or Latin classes to know what they would be called, like what life would be in Latin, but that veritas, post veritas, something like that. We'll go with it.
Sounds
we'll
good.
Fix it in post if we need to. First, real question to you, Scott. In your experience, the companies that sell to nonprofit, what percentage of those companies do you think are regularly doing win-loss meetings or calls about their wins and losses?
Well, I've worked at several companies now that sell to nonprofits. I would say, and this is a bit of a guess, but my guess would be like 30%, maybe 1 in 3, and that may even be generous.
Why so low?
I think that the sales teams are really more focused on prospecting activities, pipeline building activities, moving deals through their sales process and through the stages, and getting deals positioned to close, as opposed to spending time post-mortem and looking back on the whys of why did we win, why did we lose, what were the reasons giving, do we see trend? I just think it's they get to the answer and then they go back into their pipeline and continue on with the next deal, as opposed to spending time on the ones that are already closed now.
Kevin, what are the 70% of companies that are not doing this losing?
Well, one, I would say that was a generous number. And two, I think it's important to talk about when we say win-loss calls, what does that actually mean, and who is doing that? And I know we'll get into some of these topics, but I'll just give an example. Like I've worked with a number of companies and trying to help with sales process and so forth. And one of the first things I'll ask for as an outsider is, hey, can I see the win-loss data? And it's in the CRM. And I'm like, okay, but so who fills that out? And they say, oh, well, the salesperson fills it out. And that may be a call that a salesperson has that gets the news that they didn't win the deal, or maybe they did. And we'll talk about when calls here in a second, but for lost calls, usually is down to, hey, a pick list of 4 or 5 topics in a drop down in a CRM, which doesn't actually give you a whole lot of learning. So is that technically a win-loss call? I don't know, up for opinions, but you're not going to learn a ton in there. A lot of the data that I would see in that pick list is like budget, timing, these simple like high level topics that don't give you a lot of the learning. And so I think the like, what is a win-loss call might be something that we could dive into. But for me, a win-loss call is probably somebody that's not the salesperson, that's going in to specifically learn from the organization. Your biggest question earlier, Mark, was why? Why did they choose to go with us? Why did they choose to go with somebody else? And that could be a myriad of topics. I would argue that if it's the AE, they're too emotionally attached, and the organization is probably not going to give them all the ins and outs of why their decision was made.
Can you go one level up in terms of like, say, wave a wand and say it's done just the way that you want it to be done? Why? What are you as the consultant coming in and asking that question? What is the organization benefiting from?
Yeah. To me, win-loss calls are all about learning, and learning like real drivers. I think a lot of times when anybody, it's not just in the nonprofit space, but when they decide to go in a different direction, they'll give you probably the easy answer. Oh, it's too expensive. Oh, it's not the right timing. Or to your point, they just go dark. That you're not going to learn a ton from that. And so like for me, and not everybody wants to do win-loss calls, meaning not every organization is going to give you the time to do that because they've already made a decision. But to me, the learning is really powerful. And you may learn things that are very addressable in your sales process that you could change today. You may learn, oh, well, there's a feature or a function that is critical to them that you don't have, in which case that's great feedback for your product team. It may be something truly around pricing. And I mean, it could be around the pricing structure. It could be, again, things that you want to address, in your process. I think the other piece to me is like, hey, how do you help salespeople become better at communicating? That feedback is critically important across the board. And if you can educate your salespeople on some of the real drivers, that changes things like discovery and some of those other things that we talked about with demos, and again, how you present your solution. So
yeah. So you began the first part of that kind of speaking to a broader organizational. Did they select it because of the way the products and services do or don't work, the pricing, all those things that are more like operational decisions? Scott, what are you listening for or looking for to educate sales teams specifically during that process? Like, what's the magic wand outcome that you would be looking for if you were able to do a win-loss call with every win and loss on your team?
Yeah, and I think it's getting down to kind of the nuts and bolts, right? So there's various things that I'm listening for, though. I'm listening for the reason and to see if we're getting a true reason, essentially, right? And not a basic like 1-word, 2-word answer, but like, are we getting some detail on something we either already know about ourselves, meaning do we know something about our own pricing, our own structure, our solution itself? Is it something that's lacking, or did we win because of something that we have? Did we price to win, or did we not? And really, though, what I'm digging for in those is details to be sure that the salesperson did their job properly and got deep enough in the discovery process and in the demonstration process that they listen and that we set ourselves up in the best way possible to win, right? So did they, at the onset and through the deal stages, capture enough information to position us to win the deal, or at least put our best foot forward, so that we could possibly win the opportunity.
How do you, immediate follow-up to that is how do you communicate? Let's say you're a sales leader listening to this and you're not doing this today and you want to start doing this. How do you roll this out to the team or communicate it to them then where it doesn't come across as, I'm going to listen to this to make sure that you're doing your job?
Yeah, no, I think you actually position it as like, this is for the whole team, right? So you don't do it like we're going to point something out. And a lot of times what I do is I go and I listen to the final call or the recording of the final call that the sales rep had. There are times when I'll point out the deal itself, depending on if there's something specific and we just want to talk about a specific topic. There's times when I'll keep it a little bit anonymous and just share with the team, essentially like, I heard this, and this on this call that I just listened to and reviewed. I want to talk to you guys about making sure that we do our job at the onset, and I do it in a broad way enough so that it's for everyone. Now, the person whose call it is typically knows it, and understands that it's kind of directed at them as well. But I want everybody to make sure that we're either refreshing what they already know or giving them some new tips and techniques and tactics. So, it's really going back and getting back into like, hey, during discovery call, you need to make sure you gather enough information for us to move to a demo. During a demonstration, we want to make sure we have enough information on who the stakeholders are and what are the drivers and what are they looking for? What are the key items that are must-haves or must-not-haves? What did we position as far as ourselves as partners and our broader ecosystem? Did we do those things properly? And a lot of times that's kind of what we go back to in those win-losses and just regular meetings to make sure everybody has those learnings.
And so, Kevin, can you talk about how they should be structured or how you structure them? Are you trying to do them on every deal? Or are you trying to do them for every rep? You already mentioned like maybe not the best if salespeople are the ones leading the charge on this. So how would you recommend somebody do this in an ideal state?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, like the reality is you can't do them on all calls. I think on some of, and again, depending on what product or service you have, that could range from very transactional to very complex and enterprise and so forth. And so like not getting into the nuance, but like I would try and pinpoint the ones that are, if you were to define your ICP, like, man, that was it. Those were the ones we thought we should have won. And, we didn't. And there has to be some learning from that. In terms of structure, again, I don't, as an AE myself, I never felt like I would do some debrief as well. But there was also this, like, I don't know that they're going to tell me everything that they may have to share because I'm too close to it, right? Like they don't hurt my feelings. I'm a nice guy. We had good rapport. That part is restrictive to me. Having somebody that's further away from it, doesn't have any emotional attachment. That could be a sales leader. That could be somebody in marketing. That could be somebody in product. And we could talk about who the right team is. I think one of the challenges with this is that it's not defined at who should be doing these calls.
Okay, so Scott, who should be doing the calls?
So in my experience, it's been typically myself as a sales leader or the marketing leader, as Kevin mentioned. My preference is the marketing leader because there is less attachment to the outcome, essentially. So the outcome impacts the salesperson and it impacts the sales leader more directly than it does other people in the organization. So my preference is to have that marketing person do it for outreach and for learning, and then we can turn it back into training back for the team.
And to be clear, you're both speaking of, after a deal is marked as closed won or closed lost, someone from your company is reaching back out to them to ask some additional follow-up questions. Is that a 100% necessary part of a win-loss or a retrospective, or is there a world in which you could, Scott, to your point, like review all of the calls that were made or review how that moved through the system and have that happen without that feedback?
Depends on what the information is that you get, in my opinion. So if you actually got a very clear picture of why a decision was made, and you have a good understanding of sort of the reasoning that was shared, sometimes it can end there. I'd say most of the time that we should have that marketing or third party person reach back out to gather as much detail as possible. They're going to learn something that the sales team might not have been able to, or it might not have been shared with the sales team. So I always think it's valuable.
And we, Kevin, we have a lot of early feedback on the podcast here. We've gotten companies who have reached out and said, like, this is great to train the team and have them listen to it. We've heard that a lot, though, from a lot of small teams and small companies. Mm-hmm. And I'm imagining them listening to this and saying, like, great, but whomever said it off the top, like, we don't really have the time right now because we have these 10 initiatives we've got to get out. Scott has told me as a sales rep, I've got to make 100 calls for the next 5 days and then give him 3 bulleted points on what I learned on every call. And Kevin is all over me about partnerships, and our company leader is all about. So make the case for making time for these.
Yeah, I'll give you an actual real life example.
Ooh. Now I'm really vested here.
Wow. This was contract work that I was doing, come in and help with a sales process. And the first thing I did was, hey, do you do win-loss calls? Because I learn a lot from that, because it gives you really good insight into the why people are making decisions either way. This was a services company. They were not doing win-loss calls for a variety of reasons. So I talked to them about that. I said, hey, this is a really good learning tool. I talked with them about how to do these calls. When the next meeting that I came in, they were both excited and a little bit embarrassed to say, we did win-loss calls and we're excited to share with you what we learned, but we're also like, what we learned was really eye-opening. They had a perspective to not use SlideShare in their presentations. It was a very intentional thing that they did. And what they heard as a trend was like, oh, their competitors were showing up differently. They had charts and graphs. They had other things that explained that they had been here and done that. I'm oversimplifying what they found out, but they were, when I say light bulb moment, I was like, this is fantastic because it's a solvable issue. And that was a real life example. That was something they could change today. And imagine if they had been doing that on a regular and like picking up on the fact that how they present and show up in some of these meetings could have been done differently again, it's how you show up and understanding some of those ins and outs, really important. I'll give you another really good example. And this was one personally for me. I never thought I had a locked in deal as much as this particular one. When we went on site to do our demo and discussion, the executive director that was there, it was my primary audience, was answering all the questions that her team was asking based on conversations she had with my clients about how they were using our product in real life every day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she did all her homework. She's answering all the questions. Like, this deal is done. And we lost that deal. And the reason we lost that deal, because I had a conversation with their CTO later on. And he said, man, we loved your solution. And, but there was a piece within your roadmap of where you were going to be in 3 to 4 years that you just didn't have an answer for. And he said, I'm trying to invest in the next, 8 to 10 years. You guys didn't have an answer. Holy smokes, that changed my perspective on what I needed to present and sort of be aware of. But again, it's those types of learnings I think are just really important to listen to. I'll add one comment on previous question. I think wave a magic wand. I think actually marketing, sales, even product, dividing up who does these calls, because you listen differently, you ask slightly different questions. That's a best case scenario. I think time is a really big issue. Maybe you can divide the workload over a group of people. I think having a common structure is important. But one of the biggest things I think to set the tone with the organization is setting the expectations. I am not here to resell or try and sell you out of your decision. I'm not going to be here trying like, oh, but you didn't get that right, or you're not doing that. It's solely for learning purposes. Has to be disarming. They have to believe that you're there to learn and get their honest feedback. And that's where you're going to get the biggest gains from this type of process.
How can you expound on how then you structure that? You mentioned like you have a framework for doing those calls. What are some tips that people can learn, assuming they don't want to just reach out or call the customer and be
Yeah.
like, hey, you told us no, why? And then wing it.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of areas to dive into. One is a little bit about like what, just so I understand, like what were the key drivers for the decision? Like what things were you trying to gain out of, switching technology or looking at this service? That ties back to your discovery calls. If they say, hey, our biggest things were X, Y, and Z, now you have all these, call recording capability. I can go back to the discovery call and say, do we actually tap into that thing? Yes or no? There's questions around process. What were the key elements in terms of, how you make your decision? I ask about competitive landscape. Who else were you looking at? Who else did you, who ultimately did you decide on and why? And trying just open-ended questions on that. You're going to hear some subjective things that might be around sentiment or just, what have you. The other piece, and I would be remiss if I didn't, some of this is around, especially when we talk about technology, capabilities and so forth. The reality is that's not the be all end all. In a lot of these calls, I find out there's company confidence. Their feelings on, the type of support that we're going to get, the way it was going to get rolled out, did we have confidence in? Some of those things come up in these calls, which again, if you're on the front line selling technology and all I do is talk about features and functionality, and I don't talk about, hey, this is where our support team shows up, here's how we do implementation, so you have confidence with that. Again, those are addressable things, but it's important to hear what client feedback would be on those.
So Scott, what happens because in my career in leading sales, I've had some really uncomfortable situations where some of that feedback is like, we didn't like the salesperson. We didn't like them personally. We didn't like the way that they did things. How do you always communicate that feedback back to the sales reps? And then how do you do it, especially in those situations where they may call someone out by name?
Yeah. And I've been in those situations as well where you get the feedback. And I think it's important to like really dig in those conversations with the prospect who did not become a customer and made that decision on like the details of like, what occurred, what really made you feel that way. Was it phrasing? Was it attitude? Was it a combination of things, right? To get enough feedback to get a real picture on it. Because if somebody's making a decision based on a personality as opposed to partnering with your organization and finding a solution that fits their organization, typically there's probably some extreme feeling there. And so you want to kind of get enough information so that you can then turn around and in a one-on-one with the salesperson, talk about technique, talk about approach, talk about the feedback that you got, and I try to do it in a way that is not just completely negative, but say like, here's some feedback that I heard. Share kind of the gist of the feedback, but give some recommendations on how to change things, right? So like if it was body language, or if it was a combination of the wording and the phrasing that you use, or telling them what they need to do instead of asking them what you want to do, like there are ways to kind of change phrasing and change approach and technique and tactic with a salesperson that can cater to, you know, a broader audience within the nonprofit sector. I think I've had enough time in this marketplace to sort of understand the personas, but there's times when you get surprised, right? So, you know, you have to sort of listen for like, is this a one-off thing and somebody was very sensitive to one thing and it's standard, or is this something I need to work on with the salesperson? So
separate the signal from the noise in that case, right? Sure. Yeah. What about those cases? Because again, a lot of what we're talking about here is either sales leaders or salespeople themselves going back and listening to the calls that they've done to see where they could have been, you know, improved in that process. What do you do for those salespeople who are just like deeply uncomfortable with listening or to themselves, watching their own calls? Like, you just know that they want to get up and leave the room or close their laptop forever rather than listen to themselves.
There's times when my current team, we don't have that issue. They all like to hear themselves for some reason, but I've had people that are sort of like that, right? And with those, I sort of try to either one of two approaches: isolate the part of the conversation that I know I really want to dig into and just listen to that minute, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever it is, so that it's not like the whole lead up and then the whole follow up to the point I want to discuss, and just sort of isolate that and get them to like listen, potentially give me their immediate feedback, and then we can get into a discussion on approach and tactic and you know, a different way to look at that. Other times I will listen to it, the entire thing myself, take my own notes, ingest all of that, and then have the conversation with the salesperson in a coaching way, referencing that call, but not actually making them necessarily listening to it verbatim. Because I think a lot of times they know what they said, but sometimes salespeople don't really know what they said. So if I need to, I can always call up that recording and say, well, you know, you're telling me you said this, but I'm kind of hearing this, and I can see how the interpretation could be different. Let's talk about that and like get into, like, again, back to coaching, back to tactics, back to language that we use and how we communicate.
And so we've talked about why companies should be doing these win-loss calls. Kevin, you talked a little bit about how they do them. Let's talk for a moment about ways to make this better or more efficient, because I think we're at a super interesting time around the technology, right? We've got call recording software, which I assume almost every company is deploying, or at least if they're on a Zoom or a Google Meet, they can hit record on it. What do you think is either necessary in terms of technology to capture all of this? And then if you go one step further, what are some tools that you could use to make these better or more efficient? And I'm specifically thinking through ways to like utilize AI or ChatGPT and call transcripts and things to make this whole process better, easier, more accessible, et cetera.
Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
No, go ahead, Scott. You're the guest.
I was just going to say, we have call recording solution, which is both video and audio. Everybody brings note takers to calls as well. So like, you can't really join a web meeting without having everybody's note taker show up. So there's good capture capabilities these days that I feel like was resisted until more recent. But it's good because we can go back, we can review the language that was used, we can review and see what the feedback was. You can listen and you can see body language. So those things are really helpful. From the what do the tools bring perspective, I would say like AI and GPTs can both give you summaries of the calls, which is great because sometimes they break it down into more digestible chunks of data and parts of the conversation. But they also can give you overall summary information, industry trends, benchmarks at times, right? So they can you can actually go back and ask a GPT essentially like, what would be a benchmark to mark this against, if you were talking about stats or getting feedback or whatever during the call. So I find that to be valuable and a good way to sort of start to break down those calls into segments to coach with. Go ahead, Kevin. Sorry about that.
No, I would echo. I mean, I think the technology just brings a lot of opportunity, and maybe to think about that a different way. If we've been doing 10 lost calls per month, per quarter, whatever, for an entire year, I could feed that into an AI engine and say, give me the trends across all of these. And that's a really good example of where it can aggregate or help sort of consume some of those things as well. Back to, I think, some interesting opportunities would be, hey, feed in our discovery call transcripts as well and do a comparison. Are we picking up on the same trends? There's just ways to like leverage those tools to pull out and tease out trends and learnings that you may not get if you're just listening to one call in isolation. So I think there's opportunity there. If you do that, the reality is you still need to do the calls. Like that is the postmortems, the post-decision calls still need to be done in order to get the learning side of it. And I think that's a time-consuming one. I put in my notes sort of leading in, this tends to not be anything somebody's metriced on. It's not an MBO, it's not a goal, it's not anybody's like official job. And so if it's not my like full-time thing or it's not part of my regular cadence, it's the first thing that doesn't get done. And so I think that's a big challenge just in general when we think about this. I think the other piece that tends to get swept under the rug, we talk about win-loss calls. The reality is we do that more on loss calls than we do on wins because we won the business. Must have been great. Like we did all the right things. But I would argue you can learn a lot from the win calls as well, especially if you go in with, let me understand from, sort of the whole buying journey, what things really resonated, what did we do well, what could we improve on, again, competitive landscape, how did we show up against our competitors? You can learn a ton from win calls as well, but those tend to be not done.
So I agree. In my experience, like the losses, we could all say whether it's cultural or consistent hearing, like you learn more from your losses than you do your wins. It's like a thing we hear in life, right? But I want to circle back on something you said earlier, Kevin, about like we want to set the expectations with customers or lost customers that this isn't an attempt to resell you. Is there ever a tactful way to ask for referrals on a win-loss call for a one customer? Because one of the things that I've seen be true in my career in SaaS and hear this echoed in other industries as well is like our purchase happiness is always highest right after we buy, right? Our level of satisfaction always reaches its emotional height right after we buy. So you call one of these customers who has chosen to purchase your software, you hear them just like hit all the highlights of like, this is everything you do great before your competitors. Is it uncouth to follow that up with a, do you know anybody in the industry who is also struggling with these things who we should speak with?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can read the room a little bit too, right? If there's an openness and you're having good, honest conversation, there's good rapport. That question, I think, can be asked in a way that's not off-putting or what have you. But the reality, and you can sort of put this in perspective, the reality is you probably identify a lot of organizations that have a need, because there's a network of folks that are already talking. And so I think you can probably bridge the gap of, hey, we get a lot of opportunities from folks just word of mouth. We know that you're in that area, or you work with other insert vertical type organizations here. Are you aware of anybody else that could use our help? We've had a great experience. I mean, I think you can take that in a very non-threatening kind of perspective, but I've always found I don't know. I'll give an example. I used to manage a territory that had Chicago, and it was very ripe with a lot of nonprofits. They were very connected. And I would always sort of leverage that. Hey, I know you're in Chicago. It's a really tight community. There are other organizations look and feel like you. Are there anybody in your network or in your meetings that come up that might make sense for us to talk with? And I haven't asked for a referral. I haven't asked for, but it's sort of leaning into, hey, you have a community that you're already engaged with.
What about asks for marketing assistance, coming to being a speaker at a conference, being a part of a case study, being on a webinar, what have you? Is that the time to do it, or does it like cheapen it a little bit if you tag it with something like that at the end?
For me, I mean, again, I'm reading the room. It depends on why I'm there. I mean, my first thing is I'm learning, and I want to do that in isolation and not sort of rock the boat. I think some of the, if you're
It's the only time that you don't rock, Kevin. Sorry, go ahead. You were gonna make a great point.
I should even take that. Was that a compliment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Very good.
I mean, you know me. How many incredible rockers do I follow on a daily basis on the stand-up bass? And you stand above all of those.
What? Yes.
Exactly.
Now I forget my point. You interrupted. Where were we?
We were going to ask Scott, when you get these learnings from the sales team, I know we've talked about marketing should listen to them, and product should listen to them.
Mhm.
How do you make the case to a leadership team that the information that you're gathering on these calls should be used or should be pushed wider? Or, how do you make the case to them that product should be spending time digesting this information that you're collecting here?
So currently in my last organization, I started this as well. I do a once a week standing deal review and pipeline review. And we also do win-loss sharing during that as part of the deal. So it's not just active deals, it's closed deals. And I invite everybody's invited basically on our leadership team, but our CEO sometimes attends, our CFO sometimes attends, but more often I get the marketing team to attend, the product team to attend, and the leader of customer success and support, which I think is key, so that they can hear the feedback. And then we have to begin the week on Monday mornings, we have a leadership meeting. So if there's something I again want to reiterate with that group, I actually have great opportunity to circle back to what you heard on Friday and why it's important, whether that's something about our solution, something that we should take to the product team, either we don't have, we should be hearing because we're getting a lot of, wins or losses based on this feedback or based on this functionality. And for customer success, I like them to, and they're part of the implementation process as well. I like them to know sort of what's coming down the pipe so that they can be ready and also understand where we win, where we lose, what the expectations were, the whys from the customer's perspective, so that when they have their first conversation, they can actually speak to the whys and the pros of what's been sold and kind of go along with what sales presented, because sometimes they're not part of that initial sales process. So for continuity purposes, I think each of those areas should be involved listening, or at least get summaries and have like that leadership level conversation.
And I'll end with one question to Kevin.
Kevin's got a point.
He's going to make a point. It's going to be a great one. Or he remembered what he was going to say.
Yes, there's one thing that I have done with companies that I've worked with as well, which is this why we win. And I'll go department by department and ask that question from different people. Why do you think you win deals? Why do you think you win deals over insert competitor here? And I'll collect that information across the company and get perspective of what the internal assumptions are on why they win. And then you can compare that against your win-loss calls or what have you. That's a very, I know, again, time consuming, yes, but very enlightening exercise, because some of the assumed reasons may not be actually true. And you also uncover that, oh, well, in some cases I found like the product team has an answer that's different than what you're hearing from sales, that might be different than you're hearing from other departments. And that's, again, how do you address those things to come back to, well, here's what we think internally, but here's what we're hearing externally from clients and prospects, to get better alignment on that for sure. So anyway.
So my last question to you both, we'll start with Kevin and then go to Scott. If someone's listening to this and their company has never done this before, or they used to do it and they haven't done it in a long time, and they're a leader at that company, they stop listening to this podcast, what's the first thing that they should do? Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I think just getting started. You don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to do 100 calls. It can be a small number, but just get started. And I think, in terms of, I know we talked about what's the ideal process and format and this and that and the other. I think having, even if it's a small number, just get started and be curious. You're learning. You should be trying to tease out some of those drivers and just listen without opinions. And then you can come back and sort of analyze what you heard after. But that to me is the easiest. Like, don't overcomplicate it. Having these calls is important. You're going to learn from them one way or the other. Be curious and be there just to sort of listen and learn from those calls.
Do you cold call the person, or do you send them a note, an email, LinkedIn message, whatever, and preface it?
Yeah, I typically would preface it and set expectations of, hey, I'm not trying to like resell you. We know you made a decision to go in a different direction. Totally respect that. My job here is to learn, and that's the way I would go about that, because you want to set expectations around why you're there. You do want to be non-threatening of like, hey, I'm not trying to resell. I think the other piece is like, I just need 30 minutes of your time. You need to set some of those expectations. I'm not going to sit here and grill you for 2 hours, but yeah.
Scott, same question to you about what do you do first?
I think from the sales leader perspective, the first thing I want to do is go back to figure out sort of how much time am I going to spend basically on doing a win-loss. Like, is it going to take a 1 hour meeting? Meaning, am I going to set a new meeting up, or am I going to take an existing standing meeting with my team to do this? How much time do I have? And then go back and run the reports out of the CRM, run all the win-losses for the month, the quarter, the year, whatever you think you have time to do, essentially based on like volume and how much time you've set aside, and then start to go through it during that call, right? So set up the call with intention. We're going to do win-loss review and looking for understandings and learning so that we can turn that into coaching and us all getting better as a team together. Going through and gathering that information the first time from the salespeople on why did we win, why did we lose. And sometimes they're going to show up with a couple of word answers, right? I'm going to take notes on all that during that. Depending on how much time we have in that call, it may be that one or maybe the next one where I'm going to go and get deeper, right? And say, all right, so we covered 25 deals on that call, or 20 to make it a round number. I heard, 8 of them said this. Let's dig into that trend and let's talk about it. And so I'll take it into like chunks essentially of like, what are the things we're hearing the most and most often, and these are the reasons, and then really digging into it with the sales team. A lot of times that can turn into sort of a complaint session for the sales folks on like why they're losing and it's out of their control. But you're going to get some good information either on their strategy, their tactics, or being able to coach them on ways around that. Or you're going to learn things that you can take to the product team, to the marketing team, and to others in the organization to say, hey, we're seeing this trend, and we're either winning or we're losing a lot, and we need to double down, or we need to focus here. So I think you can paint the picture that you're bringing value to the sales team as you go into it, but I kind of step into the process a little bit if I haven't done it for a while.
Yeah, and that point about it kind of turning into the blame game is a good one. One of the things in my history that I have brought over from a leader who used to call these after action reviews, and took a playbook out of the military to review any kind of action. One of the things that we took from that on the sales leadership side that I thought was really valuable was the first kind of ground rule when reviewing these wins and losses was no assigning of blame. That we're not here to blame any individual. It is simply an internal learning session. And I think by taking that off the table, you can keep moving past whenever the discussion starts to go into, well, somebody did this or the product doesn't do that, to make it more matter of fact of like, okay, what did we expect to happen here? What actually happened? What do we need to keep doing that we did well? What do we need to stop doing that we did poorly? And how do we get better? And I thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a really good point. We've been at this for a while now. Tons of good information here. Scott, thank you for joining. I'm assuming if there are some nonprofits listening, they can learn more at idonate.com. Anything else you want to plug? Information, webinars, totally up to you.
Yep, we have a web event coming up April 2nd on how to utilize AI and GPT to help optimize online fundraising. So want to promote that. You can get to it by going to idonate.com/id-labs. That information sits there, as well as a lot of other good resources like videos and ebooks, some of our blogs and our GPTs that you can actually use. So if that's valuable to you and you're curious about AI and GPTs and how they add value, please attend on April 2nd.
Great. And for anybody who is in the industry selling to and supporting nonprofits, if you would like some help in a third party calling your wins and losses to gain that information, you can reach out to us, to myself on LinkedIn, or to Kevin on LinkedIn, or visit us at constantmethod.com. In the meantime, please subscribe to wherever you get your podcast so you can keep listening to these episodes that drop every Wednesday. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, y'all.
See you.